The camera flashes started before the appetizers even hit the table. Every few seconds, another burst of light bounced off the 23-foot glass wall overlooking the city skyline. Crystal glasses chimed together. Expensive watches caught reflections from the chandelier. Somewhere behind me, a hired photographer was asking people to smile again because the first set of pictures didn't look celebratory enough. The Alder family had never struggled with celebration. My father spent $84,600 on this dinner party, according to the event planner's invoice sitting on his assistant's desk 3 days earlier. I knew because I'd accidentally seen it while dropping off a birthday gift for my mother. The guest list included investors, local politicians, business reporters, and anyone important enough to make my father feel important by association. Tonight's reason was my younger brother. Kellen Alder had just won Tech Innovator of the Year. The trophy sat directly in the center of the dining table like a religious artifact. It was nearly 2 feet tall, made from polished crystal, and mounted on a black marble base. The award had its own spotlight, naturally. Kellen leaned back in his chair and smiled every time someone glanced at it. By the time dessert arrived, he'd mentioned the award 7 separate times. Not that anyone was counting. I was. To Kellen, my father announced, standing from his seat and lifting a crystal glass. The room immediately quieted. To vision, to leadership, to building something that people can actually see. A few guests nodded. My father turned toward my brother. When I started Alder Technologies 38 years ago, I dreamed that one day someone in this family would take things further than I ever could. Tonight proves I was right. Applause erupted around the table. Kellen gave the humble smile he'd practiced for interviews. The fake one. My father continued speaking for another 3 minutes about innovation, market expansion, leadership, and several other words executives use when they're trying to congratulate themselves without sounding obvious about it. Then Josie decided to help. That was always dangerous. "Oh my God," she said suddenly. Every head turned toward her. I held up a small wooden box. I almost forgot. My stomach tightened immediately. The box was familiar, very familiar. "I found this in Corinne's coat by the front door." She smiled brightly. "Maybe we should celebrate her accomplishments too." The room chuckled politely. My father laughed. Kellen smirked. Josie slid the box across the table and opened it. Inside were 3 gunmetal gray medallions. No ribbons, no decorative engraving, no polished surfaces. Just dull, metal discs roughly the size of silver dollars, each stamped with a series of letters and numbers that meant absolutely nothing to anyone in that room, exactly as intended. Several guests leaned forward. They looked disappointed. One investor actually frowned. I couldn't blame him. Compared to Kellen's giant crystal trophy, those medallions looked like spare machine parts. My father picked one up between 2 fingers. He held it toward the chandelier. The metal barely reflected any light. That seemed to amuse him. "What is this?" he asked. More laughter. He rotated the medallion slowly. "No ribbon?" He flipped it over. "No inscription?" Another laugh. Then he looked directly at me. The room beat. My father grinned. "Fake participation medals for fixing the Pentagon's Wi-Fi?" The table exploded with laughter. Not loud laughter, worse. The polite kind. The kind people use when someone powerful makes a joke they don't actually find funny. Josie nearly spilled her wine. Kellen shook his head. My father wasn't finished. They looked like they came from a cereal box. More laughter. I noticed one reporter quickly glanced toward me before returning his attention to Kellen. He had already decided which family member mattered. Most people had. That was fine. The strange thing was that my father genuinely believed what he was saying. He wasn't trying to be cruel. Not deliberately. He simply couldn't imagine value that wasn't visible. If something mattered, it should come with cameras. If someone succeeded, there should be headlines. If an achievement couldn't be displayed in a glass case, then maybe it wasn't an achievement at all. That had always been his worldview. And for 34 years, I had never challenged it. I looked at the medallion in his hand. The serial number started with GC17. Ghost citation. 1 of 3. The first had been issued after an operation that lasted 47 consecutive hours. The second came after a situation that never appeared in any newspaper. The third existed because several million Americans woke up one morning completely unaware that something catastrophic had almost happened overnight. Nobody at this table would ever know the details. Nobody was supposed to. My father set the medal down, still smiling, still entertained. waiting for me to defend myself. Instead, I reached for my water glass. I took a slow sip. The room gradually became quiet. People expected embarrassment, an argument, maybe even tears. I gave them none of those things. I carefully placed the glass back onto the table. Then I looked at my father. They aren't meant to shine, Dad. The room fell completely silent. I glanced at the wooden box. They're meant to be forgotten. Nobody laughed this time. For a second, I thought my father might ask another question. Instead, he shrugged. The moment passed. Conversation returned. Champagne flowed. Investors talked business. Reporters chased better stories. Within 2 minutes, everyone was focused on Kellen's trophy again, exactly where they wanted to be. I closed the wooden box and rested my hand on top of it. Have you ever worked harder than everyone in the room and still been treated like you accomplished the least? Comment below. And if stories about quiet strength, family betrayal, and earned respect speak to you, remember our new premieres go live every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Make us part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next story. Across the room, another round of laughter rose around Kellen's table. But somewhere far beyond the city lights outside those windows, rows of secure servers continued humming behind reinforced doors, completely unaware that a family dinner had just mocked something the government itself barely acknowledged existed. I slipped the wooden box into my coat pocket before anyone noticed I was leaving. Most of the guests were gathered around Kellen by then. A reporter from Northwest Business Journal was taking photos beside the trophy. 2 city council members were waiting to shake his hand. My father looked happier than I'd seen him in months. Nobody stopped me. That wasn't unusual. I crossed the lobby, handed my valet ticket to the attendant, and waited while my car was brought around. The silence felt good. After 3 hours of listening to people congratulate each other for being important, silence felt expensive. The box rested on the passenger seat as I drove home. 3 ghost citations. 3 pieces of metal that looked worthless. That was the point. If they looked impressive, people would ask questions. Questions got people killed. The first citation had been issued after an operation buried under 6 different classification layers. The second was connected to a threat assessment that still existed only on isolated government servers. The third sat in that box because a group of foreign cybercriminals had come dangerously close to turning 27 million Americans into collateral damage. None of those stories would ever appear on television. None of them could. The public likes heroes they can recognize. My world worked differently. The most successful mission was usually the one nobody ever learned happened. The next morning, I was sitting inside a secure compartmented facility nearly 60 feet below ground. No windows, no phones, no personal devices, just rows of encrypted systems, security checkpoints, and enough reinforced concrete to survive things most people never think about. The air always smelled faintly of electronics and industrial cooling systems. I logged into my workstation. 3 separate authentication steps. 1 biometric scan, 1 rotating encryption key, 1 final authorization token, routine. Across the room, a digital operations board displayed active threat monitoring from multiple reroutes around the world. Hundreds of analysts, operators, and engineers worked inside facilities like this every day. Most Americans never knew we existed. That was fine. A woman named Rachel dropped into the chair beside mine and handed me a coffee. 3 hours of sleep, she asked. 4. Show off. I took the coffee. She wasn't completely wrong. The previous week had been rough. A criminal syndicate operating through 6 countries had attempted to compromise critical infrastructure controls connected to regional energy distribution networks. Public reports later described it as a minor technical incident. It wasn't. For 36 hours, my team had tracked malicious code moving through multiple systems simultaneously. At one point, we estimated a successful attack could have disrupted power across major portions of the eastern seaboard: hospitals, airports, traffic management systems, emergency communications, everything. People often imagine cyber warfare as teenagers sitting in basements. The reality is much less entertaining. It's spreadsheets, code reviews, infrastructure maps, risks calculations, and thousands of tiny decisions made by exhausted people who understand exactly how bad things could get. At 2:13 in the morning during that operation, I approved a countermeasure that isolated 3 compromised nodes before the attack could spread. The decision took 6 seconds. The planning behind it took 8 months. Nobody outside this building would ever know. The power stayed on. People woke up, made coffee, drove to work, complained about traffic. Life continued normally. That's how success looked where I worked. Invisible. I stared at a monitoring screen and remembered something from the dinner party. My father's voice. To building something people can actually see. I almost laughed. Kellen's company had released an app update that quarter. My team had prevented a regional catastrophe. Guess which one received magazine covers? Life has a sense of humor. Most of it isn't funny. The strange part wasn't the lack of recognition. I stopped caring about recognition years ago. The difficult part was watching people who knew nothing about my life confidently explain why it had less value. Every family gathering followed the same script. Kellen's latest business deal, Kellen's newest interview, Kellen's next expansion project. Then someone would eventually ask me if I was still working with computers. As if I repaired printers for a living. I never corrected them. Not because I couldn't, because I wasn't allowed to. There is a unique kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying responsibilities you can never discuss. You learn to sit quietly while people misunderstand you. You learn to absorb assumptions. You learn that defending yourself often creates more problems than remaining silent. By late afternoon, my shift ended. 21 separate threat reviews, 4 operational briefings, 1 classified assessment. Nothing unusual. I drove to my parents' estate that evening to drop off a birthday gift I'd forgotten to leave for my mother. The party equipment was still being removed from the property. Rental crews loaded tables into trucks. Florists packed arrangements into containers. The giant banner celebrating Kellen's award still hung near the main patio. I left the gift with a house manager and headed back toward the parking area. That's when I heard Kellen's voice. The patio overlooked the rear garden. Several investors were gathered around him. Whiskey glasses, business suits, the usual audience. I wasn't trying to listen. Then I heard something that stopped me. We're positioning ourselves for the biggest contract in company history. One investor raised an eyebrow. Federal? Kellen grinned. Department of Defense. The group immediately became interested. Another investor asked whether his company had enough clearance experience. Kellen waved off the concern. That's the easy part. I stayed where I was, hidden behind a stone column near the walkway. One investor laughed. Easy? Kellen took a sip of whiskey. Then he delivered the sentence that made my stomach tighten. I have family in the DOD. I know how their systems work. The group laughed approvingly. Kellen smiled, confident, certain, completely unaware of what he didn't know. The ice cubes clinked softly against the side of his glass. I watched him continue explaining his future plans to people who thought confidence was the same thing as competence. Then I turned and walked away. Because for the first time all evening, I wasn't thinking about family embarrassment. I was thinking about risk. The next morning, a blinking red warning light appeared on my encrypted terminal the second I logged into the system. The blinking red warning light was still flashing when I reached for my keyboard. That alone was unusual. Most alerts inside our system appeared yellow, orange, or occasionally red depending on the severity level. The warning sitting in the center of my screen carried a designation I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. Level 8 Identity Containment Protocol. My coffee suddenly became much less important. Around me, analysts continued working normally. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was running across the room. That told me the alert was compartmentalized, meaning it was directed specifically at me. I opened the notification. The screen immediately expanded into a secure review window. Access ATEM detect. Profithead identity tripwire activated. Automated investigation in progress. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. Panic is useless in environments like this. The more serious the problem, the calmer you have to become. I authenticated twice more and opened the audit logs. Thousands of lines of activity appeared instantly. Most people imagine cybersecurity as dramatic code scrolling down giant screens. The reality is usually boring until it isn't. I started following the trail. Federal contract application. Security clearance verification request. Background validation inquiry. Subcontractor eligibility review. At first glance, it looked routine. Then I saw my own name. Corinne Elise Alder. I sat back slightly. That was unexpected. Another line appeared. Then another, then another. My social security number. My employment history. My federal personnel records. Somebody was trying to use my identity as part of a clearance package. That wasn't just inappropriate. That was illegal. I continued digging. The source request originated from a third-party data consulting company located outside Denver. The consulting company had been contracted by another firm to strengthen federal bid credentials. The next layer identified the client. I already knew what I was about to see. Alder Technologies. I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then reopened them, of course. Of course it was Kellen. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been bragging on my parents' patio about securing a Department of Defense contract. Apparently, he wasn't waiting for qualifications to catch up with his competence. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. Alder Technologies had hired private data brokers to enhance executive security profiles and improve government contracting credibility. In plain English, someone had paid a consultant to make the company look more impressive. Unfortunately, the consultant had discovered a useful piece of information. Me. Their record showed a family connection to a Department of Defense employee. Instead of asking permission like sane people, they simply inserted my information into supporting documentation. Family relationship, federal employee, security-connected reference, potential access pathway. Whoever prepared the package apparently assumed I worked a boring DESEC job, which, to be fair, was exactly what my family believed. The consultant probably imagined some harmless network administrator processing emails in a government office. A low-level employee, a convenient reference, a useful shortcut, an easy credibility boost. The problem was that I wasn't any of those things, and the systems protecting my identity didn't care about intentions, only actions. I opened another restricted file. The moment I did, the situation transformed from irritating to catastrophic. A Level 8 containment identity isn't protected like a normal government employee record. It's surrounded by automated tripwires, invisible security barriers. Most people never encounter them because most people never get close enough. Any unauthorized attempt to connect protected identities to restricted operational structures triggers immediate investigation. Not because the government is paranoid. Because history has repeatedly demonstrated that people are reckless. Kellen had just become the latest example. By noon, 2 additional analysts had quietly joined my review. Neither spoke much. That wasn't unusual. One finally looked over. Family? I nodded. He winced. That reaction told me everything. Nobody wanted this kind of case. Cases involving foreign adversaries were easier. Foreign adversaries usually understood the rules. Family members often didn't. I continued reviewing the submission package. Every page made the situation worse. There were references to military cloud architecture, restricted procurement pathways, secure infrastructure support, background verification requests. Somebody had tried pushing far beyond the level where they should have stopped. Not maliciously, not intentionally, just arrogantly. There's a difference. Unfortunately, federal law often doesn't care about the difference. At 1:47 p.m., a new notification appeared. Preliminary finding confirmed. National SICRI review initiated. I stared at the message. The machine didn't know Kellen. The machine didn't know he was my brother. The machine didn't know my father would probably turn this into a lecture about family loyalty. The machine only knew that protected identity barriers had been breached. And now the machine was doing exactly what it was designed to do. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. For the first time that day, I wasn't angry, I was disappointed. Kellen had spent his entire life believing every obstacle could be solved with confidence. Every rule could be negotiated. Every door could be opened through connections. Most of the time, society rewarded that behavior, until it didn't. The final report arrived just before the end of my shift. The recommendation was immediate escalation, further review, potential federal fraud investigation, contract suspension, security examination. The process had officially moved beyond my control. I looked at my brother's company name sitting on the screen. Then I looked at the digital timestamp. Everything that happened after this moment would be recorded permanently. There would be interviews, questions, audits, possibly much worse. And the truly unbelievable part, Kellen probably had no idea any of this was happening. Right now, he was likely sitting in some conference room talking about growth projections and quarterly revenue forecasts, completely unaware that he had accidentally stepped on one of the most heavily protected security tripwires in the federal government. He thought he was borrowing credibility from his sister. Instead, he had triggered a national security protocol. And unless I intervened personally, the next people contacting my family wouldn't be contract officers. They would be investigators. I spent the entire drive staring at the same question. How much trouble was I willing to prevent for people who had never once tried to understand me? Traffic crawled through downtown. A delivery truck blocked 2 lanes near Harbor Avenue. My navigation system estimated 43 minutes to Alder Technologies headquarters. I used every minute, not to build a case, not to prepare an argument, to decide whether I was still willing to help. Because despite everything, Kellen was still my brother. My father was still my father. The law didn't care about that. I did. That was the problem. By the time I arrived, the afternoon executive meeting was already underway. Alder Technologies occupied the top 9 floors of a glass tower overlooking the waterfront. My father loved the building because people could see it from almost anywhere in the city. Visibility had always been his favorite form of success. I walked past the reception desk. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Alder, do you have an appointment?" "No." "Your father is in a board meeting." "I know." She hesitated. Then she picked up the phone. I didn't wait. I already knew where the boardroom was. The executive floor smelled like expensive coffee and new carpet. Framed magazine covers lined the hallway. Every cover featured either my father or Kellen. Some families display family photographs. The Alders displayed publicity. I reached the boardroom doors and pushed them open. The conversations inside stopped instantly. 10 executives looked toward me. My father sat at the head of the table. Kellen occupied the seat beside him. Neither looked happy to see me. "Corinne," my father said, "we're busy." "I know." I stepped inside anyway. A quarterly revenue projection remained frozen on the giant screen behind them. Someone had been discussing growth forecasts. None of it mattered anymore. I closed the door behind me. "I need 5 minutes." My father glanced at the executives, then at me. His expression already carried irritation. "Can this wait?" "No." The room grew quiet, not because they respected me, because they sensed conflict. Corporate executives love conflict when it belongs to someone else. My father finally leaned back. "Fine, 5 minutes." I looked directly at Kellen. Not the executives, not the board members. Just Kellen, "You need to withdraw your Department of Defense bid immediately." Several people exchanged confused looks. Kellen frowned. "What? You heard me." He laughed, actually laughed. That irritated me more than it should have. "You walked in here for that?" "I'm serious." "So am I." I stepped closer to the table. "You need to cancel the contract pursuit, pull every application, terminate every related submission. Do it immediately." The room became completely silent. Kellen's smile faded. My father folded his arms. Now I had their attention. Unfortunately, not for the reason I wanted. "Why?" Kellen asked. I chose my words carefully, very carefully. There were things I couldn't explain, things I wasn't authorized to discuss, so I gave him the only warning I could. "You have tripped a wire you cannot survive." Nobody spoke. I continued. "Whatever consultant you're using, whatever data broker you're paying, shut it down." Kellen looked genuinely confused. My father looked annoyed. Neither looked concerned. That was dangerous. "Kellen," I said quietly, "cancel the contract." For a moment, I thought he might listen. Then my father stood. That ended any chance of a reasonable conversation. Harlan Alder had always been a physically imposing man. Even at 66, he still carried himself like someone entering a battlefield instead of a meeting. He planted both hands on the table, slowly, deliberately. The room immediately shifted toward him, toward power, toward authority, toward the person they believed mattered. "What exactly are you implying?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I'm trying to help you." That was the wrong answer. His expression hardened immediately. The executives watched quietly. Nobody interrupted. Nobody ever interrupted my father. "Help us?" The disbelief in his voice was almost impressive. "Kellen is about to secure the largest contract in company history." I didn't respond. He took another step forward. "And somehow you've decided this is the perfect time to walk into my boardroom and tell us how to run our business?" Still nothing. Because arguing would only make things worse. Unfortunately, silence sometimes makes people angrier than words. My father pointed toward me. "You know what I think?" I already did, but he continued anyway. "I think you're jealous." Several executives suddenly became fascinated by their laptops. "Cowards." My father's voice grew sharper. "Kellen builds company." He pointed toward the window overlooking the city. "He creates jobs." Another step. "He generates real influence." I remained exactly where I was. Then he delivered the sentence I would remember for a very long time. "You walk in here with your fake little medals and try to give us business advice?" The room froze. My father wasn't finished. "We are dealing with real power, Corinne." Another step. His voice lowered, the dangerous kind of quiet. "Go back to your cubicle and let the men handle the future." Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody defended me. Not even Kellen. He just sat there, watching. The same way he'd watched at the dinner party. The same way he always watched. I looked around the room, 10 executives. Millions of dollars in combined salaries. Not one person willing to say a single word. Interesting. I finally nodded. Not because I agreed, because I understood. The warning had been delivered. My responsibility ended there. The consequences would belong to them. I looked at Kellen one last time. "You still have time." That was all I said. Then I turned toward the door. Behind me, my father pointed toward the hallway. "Get out. No hesitation, no regret, just certainty." I opened the door, stepped through, and heard the heavy polished oak slam shut behind me. The sound echoed down the hallway, hard, sharp, final. Several weeks later, another heavy door slammed with equal force as armored military vehicles rolled onto asphalt and came to a stop outside the venue, hosting Alder Technology's biggest celebration of the year. I parked across the street and sat in the car for another 30 seconds. The gala venue glowed like a movie set. Spotlights swept across the entrance. Luxury sedans lined the curb. Local reporters stood behind velvet ropes waiting for photos. A massive digital screen above the entrance displayed a rotating presentations celebrating Alder Technologies and what the company described as its historic federal expansion. That was an interesting choice of words, especially since the contract wasn't approved. Not yet. The final clearance review was still pending. Unfortunately, nobody had informed my father that facts and confidence were not the same thing. Or maybe they had. He just ignored them. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my dress uniform. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. The uniform was simple, professional, and authorized for official functions. No rows of dramatic decorations. No visible indicators explaining what I actually did for a living. Most people would assume I was a mid-level government employee attending a formal event. That was usually the safest assumption. As I approached the entrance, I spotted 3 satellite news vans parked near the loading zone. My father had gone all out, again. 2 reporters were interviewing guests before they entered. A local state senator posed for photos beside a company banner. Several investors gathered near the entrance discussing future contracts. Everyone looked excited. I wondered how many would still be smiling by midnight. Inside, the ballroom looked exactly like something my father would design. Large, expensive, loud. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Hundreds of candles illuminated the tables. A string quartet performed near the stage while waiters circulated with trays of champagne. The centerpiece sat directly behind the podium. A giant digital rendering of the Alder Technologies logo. Subtlety had never been our family brand. I checked the room. Habit, every entrance, every exit, every service corridor, every security position. Years of training make observation automatic. Most people walk into a room. I map it. Across the ballroom, I spotted Josie. That took less than 2 seconds. She was surrounded by 3 friends and a photographer. Naturally. One of her friends noticed me first. She leaned toward Josie and whispered something. Josie turned, saw me, rolled her eyes immediately, predictable. I wasn't close enough to hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. Her expression communicated everything. Then I got close enough anyway. "Look who's here," Josie said. The group laughed softly. One woman glanced at my uniform. Josie lowered her voice dramatically. "I guess we're doing the military thing tonight." More laughter. Another woman asked if I was attending officially. Josie shrugged, probably trying to steal some attention. That earned another round of polite smiles. I kept walking. There was no point responding. Arguing with Josie was like arguing with a billboard. Neither side learns anything. Near the stage, my father stood surrounded by reporters. Camera flashes fired every few seconds. He loved every moment. A reporter asked about the federal contract. My father smiled, the confident smile, the dangerous one. Alder Technologies is entering a new era. Translation. He was already spending money he hadn't earned. Another reporter asked whether the Department of Defense deal was finalized. My father carefully avoided the question. That was answer enough. Nearby, Kellen worked the room like a politician during election season. Handshakes, smiles, backslaps, promises. Watching him was fascinating, not because he was talented, because he genuinely believed everything was under control. The federal review process had been active for weeks. Investigators had already examined records, audits had already begun, security reviews were expanding, and somehow Kellen remained completely unaware. The machine was moving. He just couldn't hear it yet. I found a seat near the rear of the ballroom, not because I wanted distance, because I wanted visibility. There is a difference. My watch read 8:42 p.m. The event schedule listed the contract announcement at exactly 9:15. I checked the room again. Nothing unusual, yet. At 8:57 p.m. I noticed something small, very small. One catering supervisor approached the main entrance and quietly spoke to another staff member. 30 seconds later, 3 waiters relocated their service carts away from the front doors. No panic, no urgency. Just movement, purposeful movement. Interesting. A few minutes later, I noticed something else. The security manager received a phone call. His posture changed instantly. He nodded twice, then began repositioning personnel, subtle, professional, but noticeable if you knew what to watch for. I checked my watch again, 9:03 p.m. The timeline matched. Across the ballroom, my father climbed onto the stage. Applause followed immediately. The string quartet stopped playing. Guests turned toward the podium. Reporters prepared cameras. Everyone focused on the stage. I focused on the perimeter, because whatever happened next wasn't going to start at the microphone. My phone vibrated once, then stopped. I glanced down. No signal. I frowned. Checked again. Nothing. 0 bars. Not weak service. No service. At all. That caught my attention. The ballroom normally had excellent reception. The venue advertised it on their website. I opened another application. Nothing. No network's access, no outgoing connection, no incoming connection. Completely isolated. Now that was interesting. Most guests hadn't noticed yet. People rarely look at their phones while waiting for speeches. I did, and I knew exactly what it meant. Temporary communication suppression. Controlled, localized, professional. The kind of thing that appears shortly before very important people arrive. A waiter passed by carrying an empty tray. He wasn't serving guests anymore. He was leaving. Several other staff members quietly followed. Not all of them, just enough. The doors near the ballroom entrance slowly cleared. The perimeter widened. Space appeared where there hadn't been space 10 minutes earlier. The invisible machinery of the Pentagon had arrived. My father continued smiling beneath the spotlight. Kellen adjusted his tie. Josie prepared her phone for photos she wouldn't be able to upload. The guests waited for an announcement. I looked toward the entrance and waited for something else. I stayed seated while everyone else focused on the stage. The difference between panic and preparation is usually visibility. Most people only notice events after they happen. I had been watching them assemble for nearly 20 minutes. At 9:14 p.m., Kellen stepped behind the podium. The applause was immediate. My father looked proud enough to burst through the ceiling. Several reporters moved closer to the stage. Camera operators adjusted angles. Guests lifted champagne glasses in anticipation. Kellen flashed the smile he reserved for interviews and investor meetings. The practiced one. The one that said success had always been inevitable. "Thank you, everyone," he began. More applause. He waited for it to settle. "My family and I are honored to have all of you here tonight as Alder Technologies enters the most important chapter in company history." A giant image of the company logo rotated behind him. People nodded approvingly. Several investors raised their phones to record. Poor timing. The videos weren't going anywhere. Kellen continued. "Over the past year, we've worked tirelessly to position ourselves at the forefront of national security innovation." The ballroom doors opened. Not dramatically, not violently, they simply opened. Then remained open. That was what made people notice. A few guests turned their heads. Then more, then everyone, because the doors weren't supposed to stay open. The event staff normally closed them immediately to preserve privacy and control noise from the lobby. These stayed locked in place, wide open. Kellen paused mid-sentence. Confusion spread through the room. The music had already stopped. Now even the background conversations disappeared. One man entered first. Dark suit, no visible badge, no expression. He moved along the perimeter wall. Then another entered. Then 3 more. Then 6. Then 10. Federal agents, plainclothes, disciplined. Silent. The room became very still. Nobody announced anything. Nobody shouted. Nobody flashed credentials. That was what frightened people. The absence of noise, the absence of explanation. The agents simply spread out and established positions around the ballroom, methodically, professionally, without wasting a single movement. A second group entered immediately behind them. Military police. Uniformed, armed. Their presence changed the atmosphere instantly. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died unfinished. One local politician quietly lowered himself back into his chair. A reporter slowly put down her camera. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone understood it wasn't good. I glanced toward Josie. The color had disappeared from her face. Her phone still sat in her hand. No signal, no social media, no audience, just reality. That had to be a new experience for her. Near the stage, Kellen attempted to recover. He laughed nervously. Looks like somebody got the wrong ballroom. Nobody joined him. The agents continued moving. One by one, they completed the perimeter. Every entrance, every exit, every corridor covered. The operation was already finished before most guests realized it had begun. That is what competence looks like. My father finally decided to intervene. Of course he did. He climbed off the stage and marched directly toward the nearest agent. The same posture, the same confidence, the same belief that status solved problems. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. The agent didn't answer. My father frowned. I'm speaking to you. Nothing. The agent remained motionless. That irritated him immediately. I am Harlan Alder. His voice rose. We are hosting a private event. Still nothing. No response, no acknowledgement, no argument. My father hated being ignored more than being criticized. To him, invisibility was the ultimate insult. He stepped closer. Do you understand who I am? The question hung in the air. The agent never even looked at him. That was the moment my father began losing control of the situation. Not because anyone threatened him, because nobody cared enough to engage. Nearbyists watched in stunned silence. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked fascinated. Human beings love power. They love watching it even more when it stops working. My father turned toward another agent. Same result. Nothing. The perimeter held. The ballroom remained locked down. The operation continued, completely unaffected by his outrage. Then movement near the entrance changed everything. Several agents shifted positions simultaneously, not dramatically, just enough. A pathway opened through the center of the room. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversations stopped altogether. Even breathing seemed quieter. Someone important was arriving. Very important. The agent stepped aside, and a man in a heavily decorated uniform entered the ballroom. The reaction was immediate. Military veterans in the room recognized the insignia first, then former government officials, then everyone else. 3-star general. United States Cyber Command. General Alden Cross. I had worked with him for 6 years. Most people in that ballroom had never heard his name. The ones who had looked suddenly nervous. General Cross walked forward at a measured pace. No hurry, no hesitation. No interest whatsoever in the hundreds of eyes following him. His uniform carried enough ribbons and decorations to fill an entire display case. Yet somehow he managed to make them seem unimportant. That was one of the reasons people respected him. The man understood the difference between authority and performance. His polished boots struck the marble floor with steady precision. Click, click, click. Each step echoed across the silent ballroom. I watched my father's expression change. Confusion, concern, then uncertainty. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because deep down, he finally understood something. These people weren't here for publicity. They weren't here for negotiations. And they certainly weren't here for him. General Cross continued walking through the crowd without slowing. Straight toward the center of the ballroom. Straight toward the stage. Straight toward the moment that was about to destroy every assumption my family had spent decades building. I remained seated while General Cross continued across the ballroom. Nobody understood what they were watching. That much was obvious. Guests expected him to approach the stage. The reporters assumed he was heading toward my father. Kellen straightened his jacket and forced another smile, apparently convinced this was somehow connected to his contract announcement. Even now he thought he was part of the story. He wasn't. General Cross walked directly past Harlan, past Kellen, past the podium, past the giant company logo. The confusion became almost physical. I could see it spreading across faces throughout the room. My father turned toward the general. Sir? General Cross never slowed down. He didn't even acknowledge him. The silence became heavier with every step. Then he stopped, 2 feet in front of me. The ballroom froze. Every eye in the room shifted from him to me. For one brief second, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody understood. I stood. General Alden Cross brought his hand up sharply and delivered a perfect military salute. Not casual, not friendly, formal, official. The kind reserved for moments that matter. The sound of people gasping hit almost simultaneously throughout the ballroom. One woman actually dropped her glass. It shattered across the marble floor. Nobody looked down. Nobody cared. They were staring at me. My father looked as though someone had physically struck him. Kellen blinked repeatedly. Josie simply stared. The general's voice remained calm. Commander Alder, I returned the salute. General, that single exchange caused more damage than any speech ever could. Because suddenly the room understood something. Not the details, not the truth, but enough. Enough to realize they had been wrong. Very wrong. My father found his voice first. What is happening? No answer. His voice rose immediately. What is this? General Cross finally turned toward him, slowly, deliberately. The same way a professor might turn toward a student who had interrupted the lecture halfway through. Not angry, not emotional, just disappointed. The effect was devastating. My father pointed at me, then at the general, then back at me. What is going on? The general folded his hands behind his back. Mr. Alder. The room became silent again. Even the reporters stopped taking notes. Because something in his junta told everyone this wasn't going to end well. Not for my family, not for Alder Technologies, not for anyone standing on that stage. General Cross spoke clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. Your son's company has been permanently blacklisted from all federal contracts. The words landed like concrete. Nobody reacted immediately. Sometimes bad news takes a second to arrive. Then it hit. Hard. The room exploded into whispers. Investors looked at each other. Reporters grabbed notebooks. One city official quietly stepped away from the stage. Smart man. Kellen laughed nervously. Actually laughed. The sound lasted about 2 seconds. There must be some mistake. General Cross didn't blink. There is no mistake. Kellen's smile disappeared. The general continued. Alder Technologies attempted to breach a level 8 security clearance barrier during a restricted federal review process. The color drained from Kellen's face. Immediately, a champagne glass slipped from his hand. It struck the floor. The crack echoed throughout the ballroom. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody cared. My brother stared at the general. What? One word, barely audible. General Cross remained expressionless. Your company employed third-party contractors to unlawfully access protected federal identity pathways. Kellen looked genuinely confused, which, strangely enough, was the most tragic part. He still didn't understand what he'd done. He thought this was a paperwork problem, a technicality, a misunderstanding. He didn't realize he'd wandered into territory designed to stop foreign intelligence operations. My father stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Nobody responded. He pointed toward me. She's a network employee. Still nothing. His voice became louder. She fixes computers. Silence. Then came the mistakes as the final mistake. The one that destroyed whatever remained of his credibility. My father pointed directly at me and shouted, "Look at her." The room turned again. She gets fake participation medals. A few people visibly was incensed. Even now, even after everything, he still thought that was the safest argument. I watched General Cross carefully. I'd worked with him long enough to recognize the warning signs. His expression didn't change, which was exactly the problem. The calmer he became, the more dangerous the situation usually was. He looked at my father, not angrily, not emotionally, the way someone might look at a man who had proudly announced he couldn't read. Then General Cross spoke, slowly, clearly, every word precise. Those fake medals, sir, are directorate citations. The room fell completely silent. I could hear the ventilation system overhead, nothing else. The general continued. The Pentagon is officially confiscating them tonight. My father frowned. Confiscating? He didn't understand. Nobody did. General Cross answered the question before anyone could ask it. They are being classified as level 8 national secrets. Several reporters stopped writing. One simply stared. Another lowered her pen. Because this no longer sounded like a business story. It sounded like something else entirely, something much larger. My father looked between us, completely lost. The general's eyes hardened, just slightly, enough. The actions your daughter took to earn those citations saved more American lives than you will ever meet. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even attempted to challenge him, because the certainty in his voice left no room for argument. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. For the first time in my life, Harlan Alder had run out of words. Around the ballroom, people stared at me differently now, not with admiration, not even respect. Something closer to realization, as if they had spent years looking at a locked door and suddenly discovered it led somewhere far larger than they had imagined. General Cross glanced toward the federal agents positioned around the room, a silent signal. Several agents immediately began moving, and only then did my family begin to understand that the evening's worst moment had not happened yet. Several agents immediately began moving. The room watched in stunned silence. No one rushed toward the exits. No one tried to intervene. The same investors who had been fighting for seats near my family an hour earlier suddenly looked interested in being somewhere else. Funny how quickly prestige evaporates when federal agents arrive. 2 investigators approached Kellen first. Professional, calm, direct. One of them quietly presented credentials. The other spoke just loudly enough for him to hear. Kellen didn't argue at first. He looked toward my father, then toward me, then back toward the agents. His brain was still trying to catch up to reality. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. Nobody responded. One investigator asked him to come along for questioning regarding the unauthorized use of protected federal identity information and contract-related security violations. Kellen laughed nervously, again. That habit was finally gone by the time he reached the ballroom doors. Because nobody else was laughing. Not investors, not reporters, not politicians, not even my father. The agents escorted him away without handcuffs. They didn't need them. The collapse happening inside his head was doing the job. Across the room, reporters suddenly found their voices again. Questions exploded from every direction. What happens now? Is the company under investigation? How long has this been going on? Can someone confirm the contract suspension? No one answered. Federal personnel rarely hold press conferences in the middle of active investigations. The silence told them everything they needed to know. Near the stage, Josie stood frozen. For years, she had carefully constructed a perfect online life, perfect vacations, perfect marriage, perfect success, perfect family. Now she looked like someone watching her house slide into the ocean. She grabbed her phone, still no signal. The irony almost made me smile. For the first time in her adult life, there was no audience available to rescue her. No followers, no comments, no carefully edited version of reality, just consequences. A few tears appeared. Then more. Within seconds, she was openly crying. Not because she understood federal contracting law, not because she understood national security, because the image was gone. The story she had been sensating herself had shattered. And unlike social media, real life doesn't offer a delete button. The ballroom slowly divided into groups. Those trying to distance themselves from the situation, those trying to understand it, and those realizing they had spent years worshipping the wrong things. I barely noticed any of them. My attention stayed on my father. Harlan Alder hadn't moved, not once. He stood near the stage, exactly where General Cross had left him, motionless, silent, defeated. I had never seen him look small before, angry thousands of times, proud, constantly, arrogant, professionally, small, never, until now. Because for the first time in his life, he couldn't buy information. He couldn't dominate a conversation. He couldn't outshout reality. The truth had arrived without asking permission. And it was larger than him. Far larger. I remembered all the years of family dinners, all the jokes, all the dismissive comments, all the assumptions. The strange thing was that I didn't feel victorious. That surprised me. For years, I imagined what it would feel like if my family ever learned the truth. I assumed there would be satisfaction, validation, relief. Instead, standing there in that ballroom, I mostly felt tired. Not exhausted, just finished. Like carrying a heavy box for so long that you barely notice when you finally set it down. General Cross quietly stepped aside, gives me space. That was intentional. He understood this part wasn't about investigations, it was about family. I walked toward my father. Slowly, no cameras flashed now, no applause, no speeches. Just 2 people standing in the wreckage of a very expensive illusion. When I stopped in front of him, he looked older than 66, much older. His lips trembled slightly. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then he finally whispered, "Why?" One word, barely audible. I waited. Eventually, he managed another sentence. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question wasn't angry. That was the difference. Anger had finally run out. All that remained was confusion, regret. The painful realization that he had spent decades looking directly at something valuable and never seeing it. I could have reminded him about the warnings, the jokes, the insults, the boardroom, the medals, the contract. I could have listed every opportunity he ignored. I could have said I told you so. A lot of people would have. But that wouldn't have changed anything. Humiliation rarely teaches useful lessons. Understanding does. So I simply looked at him. My father, the man who spent his entire life measuring worth by visibility, and I gave him the only honest answer. Because true power doesn't need a golden trophy to prove it exists, Dad. The ballroom remained silent. I continued, and true respect doesn't need to be shouted. His eyes filled, not dramatically, just enough. For the first time, I think he understood what I'd been trying to tell him my entire life. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Recognition isn't the same thing as value, and the people doing the most important work are often the ones nobody notices. Neither of us spoke again. There was nothing left to say. I reached into my coat and removed the small wooden box. The same box that had started everything. 3 dull medallions, 3 forgotten pieces of metal. An evidence officer stepped forward. I handed the box over. The citations would disappear into classified archives, exactly where they belonged. General Cross joined me near the exit. Together, we walked toward the ballroom doors. Nobody stopped us. Nobody knew what to say. Outside, the night air felt cool and quiet. No reporters followed. No cameras waited. No applause existed. Just darkness, just peace, just certainty. Behind me, my family remained inside a building filled with everything they had spent years chasing. Status, attention, recognition, image, and somehow it all seemed smaller than ever. I kept walking. Not because I was leaving them behind. Because I finally understood something they never had. You don't need the room to know your worth. You only need the courage to know it yourself. I slept for almost 11 hours after the gala. Not because I was physically exhausted. Because I was finally carrying less weight. For years, I thought the hardest part of my life was the work itself. The long hours. The classified operations. The responsibility of making decisions that could affect millions of people. The pressure of knowing that if I made the wrong call, families I would never meet might pay the price. I was wrong. The hardest part was something much quieter. It was sitting at dinner tables while people assumed my life had less value, because they couldn't see the results. It was listening to relatives explain success to me, while knowing they had no idea what I actually did. It was smiling through conversations where everyone measured human worth using trophies, titles, media coverage, and public applause. And if I'm being honest, part of me wanted them to understand. Not because I needed praise, because I wanted connection. Those are not the same thing. A few weeks after the gala, I found myself thinking less about the federal investigation and more about something my father had asked me. Why didn't you tell us? At first, I dismissed the question. Then I realized it deserved a better answer than the one I gave that night. The truth is that I didn't tell them because I couldn't. But if I'm being completely honest, that wasn't the whole story. The other reason was that eventually I stopped trying. There comes a point when constantly proving yourself becomes another form of captivity. Many people watching this story have probably experienced some version of that. Maybe not with classified operations, maybe not with national security, but with family, friends, coworkers, people who decided who you were years ago and never updated the file. The responsible child still gets treated like a child. The quiet person still gets ignored. The successful person still gets viewed through the lens of old failures. The hardworking employee gets overlooked while louder personalities receive attention. It happens everywhere. One of the most important lessons I learned is that recognition and value are not the same thing. Our culture confuses them constantly. Recognition is public. Value often isn't. Recognition is loud. Value is frequently quiet. Recognition can be bought, marketed, exaggerated, and manipulated. Real value usually has to be earned one decision at a time. Think about the people who keep society functioning every day. The nurse finishing a 12-hour shift. The truck driver delivering supplies before sunrise. The teacher buying classroom materials with personal money. The single parent working 2 jobs. The firefighter sitting in a station waiting for a call nobody hopes comes. Most of them won't receive awards. Most won't trend online. Most won't become famous. Yet their contribution matters more than many people receiving standing ovations. That realization changed my life. Not overnight, but gradually. I stopped measuring myself through other people's understanding. I stopped expecting applause from rooms that had no idea what was happening backstage. I stopped treating validation as proof of worth, and something interesting happened. I became freer. One reason people stay trapped in unhealthy relationships, toxic workplaces, and destructive family dynamics is because they keep waiting for recognition that may never come. They tell themselves, if I work harder, they'll appreciate me. If I sacrifice more, they'll respect me. If I explain myself better, they'll finally understand. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. You cannot build your identity around someone else's willingness to see it. That foundation is too fragile. My father spent decades believing that visibility created value. I spent years believing understanding would create peace. Both of us were wrong. Peace arrived when I accepted that some people may never fully understand my life, and that's okay. One of the strange gifts of working in a classified environment is that it forces you to answer a difficult question. Would you still do the right thing if nobody ever knew? Would you still work hard if your name never appeared on a plaque? Would you still serve others if there were no cameras waiting afterward? At some point, every person answers that question. Maybe not with words, but with choices. The answer shapes the kind of life you build. For me, the answer became simple. Yes. Because the outcome matters more than the attention. Because protecting people matters more than impressing people. Because character is what remains after recognition disappears. If there's one lesson I hope you take from this story, it's this. Do not allow other people's blindness to become evidence against your value. Some of the most important work you will ever do may go unnoticed. Some of your biggest sacrifices may never be fully appreciated. Some of your greatest victories may happen in complete silence. Do them anyway. Keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep becoming the person you want to be. Because at the end of the day, the loudest applause in the room is never as important as being able to respect the person you see in the mirror. And trust me, that kind of peace lasts much longer than any trophy ever will. I used to think the most dangerous people were the ones with bad intentions, the criminals, the frauds, the people actively trying to hurt others. After spending years working around national security investigations, I've learned something more complicated. Some of the most dangerous people are not malicious. They're simply convinced they're right. That realization became impossible to ignore after everything that happened with my family. Looking back, my father and Kellen did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy their reputations. They didn't intentionally build their lives around arrogance. The problem was more subtle. They built their lives around a definition of success that was fundamentally broken. And because that definition rewarded them for years, they never questioned it. They believed visibility meant value. If everyone knew your name, you mattered. If people admired you, you were successful. If cameras followed you, you were winning. If nobody noticed you, you probably weren't doing anything important. A surprising number of people live this way, maybe not consciously, but practically. You can see it everywhere. People buy things they can't afford to impress people they don't even like. People spend hours creating the appearance of happiness while neglecting the actual work required to become happy. People obsess over being admired instead of becoming admirable. And because modern technology gives everyone a stage, the temptation is stronger than ever. Social media didn't create this problem. It simply made it visible. I remember sitting across from some of the most influential people I've ever met during my career. Senior military leaders, intelligence officials, cybersecurity experts responsible for protecting systems that affect millions of lives. The strange thing was that many of them looked completely ordinary. No luxury watches, no dramatic entrances, no constant need to remind everyone how important they were. In fact, the truly capable people often spent less time talking about themselves. They were too busy doing the work. That observation changed how I evaluate people. And honestly, I think it can help outside government work too. When you're hiring someone, pay attention to how they treat the receptionist. When you're choosing a business partner, pay attention to how they handle small responsibilities before trusting them with larger ones. When you're deciding who deserves your friendship, notice how they behave when there is nothing to gain. Character reveals itself in situations where performance is unnecessary. Anyone can look impressive when the spotlight is on. The real test happens when nobody is watching. My father never understood that. He judged people based on outcomes he could see. Revenue, awards, recognition, status. The problem is that those things only tell part of the story. Some of the most trustworthy people I know have never appeared in a magazine. Some of the least trustworthy people I've met have appeared on several covers. Visibility is not evidence of integrity. Popularity is not proof of wisdom. Confidence is not the same thing as competence. Kellen learned that lesson the hard way. For years, confidence worked for him. It opened doors, won meetings, attracted investors, generated opportunities. The strategy seemed successful, until he encountered a situation where confidence could not replace preparation, a situation where assumptions had consequences, a situation where reality didn't care how persuasive he sounded. That moment exposed something important. The problem wasn't his intelligence. The problem was believing he knew more than he actually knew. That mistake destroys careers, businesses, relationships, entire lives. One reason humility matters is because it leaves room for learning. Arrogance doesn't. Arrogance assumes the answer before hearing the question. Humility stays curious, and curiosity is often more valuable than certainty. If I could offer one practical piece of advice from everything that happened, it would be this. Be careful about the people you admire. Not because admiration is bad, because admiration shapes your direction. If you admire appearance, you'll chase appearance. If you admire status, you'll chase status. If you admire attention, you'll chase attention. Eventually, you become what you repeatedly pursue. Choose carefully. Admire people with integrity. Admire people who keep their promises. Admire people who treat others with respect when there is no reward for doing so. Admire people who remain honest when dishonesty would be easier. Those qualities rarely create headlines, but they build lives worth living. The greatest irony in my family's story is that my father spent decades trying to build a legacy. And in the end, the thing that damaged him most wasn't a lack of money, influence, or opportunity. It was a failure to recognize value when it was standing directly in front of him. That mistake is not limited to boardrooms. It happens in marriages, friendships, families, workplaces, every single day. People overlook loyalty because charisma is more exciting. People ignore character because confidence is louder. People chase image while neglecting substance. Then they wonder why everything feels unstable. The truth is simple. A strong reputation can help you enter a room. Strong character determines what happens after you get there. And if you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. The people who impress you and the people who deserve your trust are not always the same people. Learning the difference may save you years of disappointment. One of the strangest things that happened after the gala wasn't the investigation. It wasn't the media coverage. It wasn't even watching people suddenly change the way they spoke to me. It was realizing how many people confused respect with something else. Over the following months, I received dozens of messages. Some came from strangers. Some came from former classmates. A few came from people I hadn't heard from in years. Many of them said the same thing. They finally respected you. At first, I understood what they meant. Then I realized they were wrong. My family didn't suddenly respect me because they learned who I was. They respected the power connected to what I was. Those are two very different things, and understanding that difference may be one of the most important lessons in this entire story. A lot of people spend their lives chasing what they believe is respect. In reality, they're chasing attention, or approval, or influence, or fear. Those things can look similar from a distance. Up close, they're completely different. I've met people who could walk into almost any room and immediately command attention. Some did it with money, some with status, some with titles, some with personality. The room would become quiet, people would listen, doors would open, opportunities would appear. From the outside, it looked like respect. Often it wasn't. Many times it was simply self-interest. People were responding to what that person could provide, not who that person was. Real respect survives after the benefits disappear. That's the difference. If someone only values you when you're useful, that's not respect. If someone only listens when you have authority, that's not respect. If someone only treats you well when other people are watching, that's definitely not respect. That's strategy. And strategy disappears the moment circumstances change. I think about General Cross sometimes, not because of his rank, not because of his authority, but because of how he carried himself. That night at the gala, he never raised his voice. He never threatened anyone. He never humiliated my father. He never reminded people how powerful he was. He didn't need to. The room understood it anyway. There is a lesson hidden inside that. The strongest people rarely spend much time trying to prove they're strong. The smartest people constantly announce how smart they are. The most capable people usually let their work speak first. That's one reason genuine confidence feels different from arrogance. Arrogance demands recognition. Confidence doesn't require it. When I look back on my own journey, the biggest victory wasn't exposing the truth. It wasn't watching my family's assumptions collapse. It wasn't being publicly validated. The biggest victory was much quieter. I never became someone else just to earn acceptance. That sounds simple, it isn't. People change themselves every day to fit expectations. They hide parts of who they are. They shrink their goals. They soften their opinions. They tolerate disrespect. They perform versions of themselves designed to make other people comfortable. Sometimes they do it for years. The cost is enormous. Because eventually you wake up and realize you've built a life around being accepted instead of being authentic. One thing I hope this story encourages you to do is take an honest inventory of your own relationships. Who respects you when there's nothing to gain? Who keeps their word when nobody is watching? Who treats waiters, cashiers, assistants, and service workers with the same courtesy they show executives? Who behaves consistently regardless of status? Pay attention to those people. They're rare, and they're worth keeping close. At the same time, ask yourself a more difficult question. Are you becoming the kind of person others can genuinely respect? Not admire, not envy, respect. Those are different goals. Respect grows from reliability, integrity, humility, consistency. The daily choices nobody celebrates. The promises you keep when breaking them would be easier. The standards you maintain when nobody is monitoring you. The truth is that character develops in private long before it becomes visible in public. Most people focus on outcomes. Character focuses on process, and over enough years, process wins. If I could leave you with one final lesson, it would be this. Never allow the world to convince you that visibility and value are the same thing. Some of the most important people you'll ever meet will never become famous. Some of the greatest contributions you'll ever witness won't appear in headlines. Some of the strongest individuals you'll ever know won't feel any need to prove themselves. Don't overlook them. And don't overlook yourself. Your worth is not determined by applause. Your value is not determined by popularity. Your dignity is not determined by recognition. Those things come and go. Character remains. Thank you for spending this time with me and following this entire journey from beginning to end. If this story gave you a new perspective on self-respect, humility, family, or what true success actually looks like, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, share it with someone who might need this message, and join us for more family revenge stories that go deeper than drama and focus on lessons we can all carry into real life. New stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Until next time, take care of yourself, stand firm in your values, and never let someone else's opinion become the measure of your worth.